how to get bereavement support is to be able to focus on, well, what is the grief process, and to have a little bit of more of an understanding of what your grief might look like. So I wanted to spend some time today talking about the grief process and also sharing with you the services that we offer here at Calvary Hospital for bereavement. And please feel free, if you have any questions or any thoughts, to share those with me at the end. You know, we get a lot of families here at Calvary who come in for bereavement support that really think that they're going crazy and unsure of what's happening when they're grieving. So that's why I think it's important to be able to try to understand the process a little bit. So when we talk about grief, grief is a response to the loss that we're experiencing. And besides really affecting our emotions, grief really reaches into every part of our lives. We feel it emotionally, physically. You know, people can come in often complaining, I can't breathe, or I feel really extremely tired. And that's because our bodies are reacting to our grief as well. Cognitively, it affects us as well. The thoughts that we think about, a lot of people talk about feeling guilty for not having done something prior to the death, or not having helped enough, even though generally you have helped all that you can. People often feel like that there's always more that they could have done. So our thoughts are affected by our grief. Behaviorally, the way we act as well, it can affect our lack of concentration, or really just people often talk about too a lot of frustration or irritation, just in general. And spiritually, it really affects people with questions of meaning. What does my life look like now? Or why did this happen to me? And trying to make meaning of where they are now with their religion and their spirituality. So I think this little cartoon here says a lot about how we can often try to deny death, and how death impacts us, and even in the language that we use around death. In this cartoon here, it says, my husband died, he didn't expire, my library books expire. No, I didn't lose him. If I did, I would pray to Saint Tony and I would find him. Let's just say what really happened. He died, okay? And I think this was important to add here because people often talk about the difficulty of being able to share their grief with others. It can be hard for other people to even stand listening to your pain sometimes. And having support when you're going through this process can be very helpful and using language that is concrete and real, and really talks about what you're actually going through. So secondary losses are all the losses that you experience outside of the physical death of the person. So there are a lot of secondary losses that you experience after a death. The losses of your family structure. Let's say, for instance, that your mom held the household and the family together, and now mom has died, and everyone's role in the family is changing. The family structure has changed. Losses to your support system. You know, for instance, if you lost your parent, you might have lost your confidant. You know, the person that you went to. It could also be for any financial issues that you had, and for support in various different ways. You could also be experiencing a loss of income as a result of the death of the significant person in your life. Like think of the death of a spouse or a partner, having lost an extra income, or having lost the only income of the household, and what that can do to affect your grief process. Loss of identity, thinking about, well, who am I now if I'm not a wife? Who am I now if I am not a mother, if I've lost my child? Loss of meaning in the world and trust in the world, those can often go together. feeling like, well, what does this mean? Again, why did this death happen to me? And loss of trust in the world and the understanding that things operate in a particular manner, and really feeling like now death has really shaken our understanding of what the world means. Like, for instance, if you experience the death of a child, it goes against the natural order of things and how we believe the world should work, that parents should die before children. And so that really tests our trust in the world and our sense of meaning and what we thought was real. Loss of dreams for the future, loss of the ideas of, for instance, spending retirement with our wife or with our husband, or the loss of the dream of having grandchildren, for instance. And lastly, loss of cultural and religious communities. For many people, let's say that they are living here in New York, however, their mother died in Trinidad, and all of their support systems and their religious community, as well as cultural community, may be in Trinidad, and what it's like to grieve here now, with a limited amount of support that you may have around you. So all of these losses are going on at the same time as actually grieving the physical death of the person. And I think this says it all here. How we want grief to work is in some linear process moving forward, when actually how grief looks is a lot more complicated than that. People often feel like they are starting to feel better, and then they'll have a day or a moment where everything comes rushing back, and that can feel quite frightening if you're not used to feeling this way, or you haven't experienced a significant loss, which very, very much frightens people. And so it's good to have the knowledge that grief does not move in a linear path. Often I will hear family members say, I thought I was doing so much better, and then all of a sudden Mother's Day came, and it brought me right back to my mother's death. And that's very normal. It's not like you're moving backwards. It's just that this is what the grief process is like, figuring out your triggers and the things that are going to be upsetting to you over time. So in the grief process, you're also looking at the loss of a past, present, and future. When we think of the past and when we experience, for instance, the death of a parent or a grandparent, we also lose the remember whens, the person that we shared a history with, and the person that can tell us more about their life and our life together. There's also losses affiliated with the present. For instance, with the death of a spouse, losing your companion, your friend, your partner, the person that you think that you're going to go through life with. And the same goes for the future, your future hopes and dreams. With the death of a child, all those hopes and dreams that you had around your child and what the future would look like, all of those end with a death. The death of a sibling, you believe that you're going to be a parallel traveler with your sibling in life, and the expectation really that this is the longest relationship that you will have, and the impact of experiencing the death of a sibling and how significant that can be. Disenfranchised grief is the term that's used to recognize a grief that is not socially recognized. And there are three ways that a grief cannot be socially recognized in the world. The relationship may not be recognized, the loss is not acknowledged, or the griever is excluded. So for instance, an example of the first one, the relationship not being recognized. It could be the death. Let's say you were a caregiver for someone for 7 years as a home health aide, and you've spent 7 years of your life with this person taking care of all of their needs, and then that person dies, Society generally doesn't recognize that as a grief for you. People may feel like, okay, well, this was your patient, just move on. But I get a lot of calls from caregivers that are having a hard time because, of course, they had a significant relationship with this person that they cared for such a significant length of time. The loss is not acknowledged. An example of that may be a perinatal loss. Oftentimes, people just feel like, that's a grief that can be disregarded in that you can get pregnant again, so you didn't really have a relationship with your baby yet, which is absolutely not true. And so often the loss goes unacknowledged and unprocessed for many people due to not having it socially recognized in many ways. Or having the griever excluded, like this can happen in many different forms, but an example here may be an ex-partner, an ex-husband, or an ex-wife, someone that was with their partner for 20 years, for instance, and then they were divorced. And they can often be excluded from funeral rites or from other ways to memorialize their loved one who died, which can lead to disenfranchisement of that loss. So here are some factors that can influence grief: family values and belief systems, the role of the deceased in your life, the deaths around, like what was going on at the time of death. Was it a very traumatic death? Was the significant person having a really difficult time in their death? So what was going on around that time? The age of the deceased. Often, of course, this is not the only factor, but this can be a factor. If a younger child, for instance, that can often go against what we believe to be the timeline for our life cycle. And also the nature of attachment and attachment style. And this speaks a lot to our attachment patterns from our childhood and the way we attach with other people. Is it hard for us to feel intimacy and closeness? Has it always been hard for us to have that attachment? Is it really hard for us to be on our own? All of these questions and these factors will affect how we process our grief. Is it a disenfranchised grief, a grief that's not publicly acknowledged? And other psychological concerns. Are there other concerns that you bring to your grief as well? Is there a history of depression or of anxiety that's unrelated to the death? All of these factors will influence what our grief process looks like, because one important thing to remember is that we bring who we are to our grief process. We bring our personalities to it. And so although, it may feel better to try to think that there is a process and that everyone's grief looks the same way, the truth is that it doesn't. It is such a unique process depending on who you are as an individual and the experiences that you've had. Some of the repetitive themes that come up in groups and with people that are in the grief process, feeling a sense of abandonment, even though, of course, that the person didn't want to die in most cases, just feeling really like this has been an abandonment of you and of the relationship that you had. Anger. This can often be an emotion that's harder for people to tolerate in themselves and for other people to tolerate. But anger is really a normal reaction to the death as well. Feeling angry, for instance, at the doctors that couldn't do everything that they could to save your loved one, or anger at the person who died, maybe at the choices that they made in their life that might have contributed to the death. So there's a lot of anger that can come up for some people. Regrets, regretting unfinished business, that you may not have had a chance to go over with your loved one who died. Feeling guilt, as I mentioned earlier, it's very normal to feel guilt as a way to kind of help you out of this helplessness. There could have been something more I could have done, or guilt for something that you said in a moment of anger towards your loved one who died. All these fears, there could also be many fears around other people that are significant to you also dying. A death really brings up a hyper awareness that, wow, death happens. It's going to happen to all of us. And someone else can also die that I'm close to. Somatic complaints, feeling grief in your body, and just get a lot of people that come in and say, I just don't have any energy, or I don't have any concentration to be able to read anymore. I'm not 100% there at work because I'm just not really able to concentrate. Feeling cheated of the relationship that you had with your significant other. Unexpected and expected triggers. One of the things I always make sure to do with my clients is to talk to them about the triggers that they may not always expect. Like, for instance, you may think that, okay, Mother's Day or Father's Day may be trigger days for you, but also to think about what might the unexpected triggers be, and working with people around that. Like, for instance, maybe you're walking down the street and you smell your mother's perfume in the air. Someone else is wearing it. That can set off a flood of emotion in that moment. And people are often unprepared for that, thinking that that wouldn't affect them as much as big holiday trigger days or anniversary dates. But often it's the triggers in your daily routine that can really feel quite powerful. And once people know that, then they can expect these triggers to come up. Grief cliches, people often talk about how painful it can be to hear other people minimizing their grief, or feeling like they should be moving on in their grief, or they should be in a different place than they are. People often speak of having friends or family come over to the house and comment on the deceased's belongings, if they're still in the home, and offering their own input on if they believe that they should be moving on by getting rid of some clothing and some belongings. These can be very hurtful things for people. Or the hearing the cliche of they're in a better place. Most people really don't want to hear that in their moments of pain, especially even when you're talking to children, for instance. What could be a better place than my father being here with me on this earth? So these are some of the themes that come up repetitively. And when we talk about different grieving styles, Martin and Doka talk about intuitive grievers versus instrumental grievers. And what this means is that not everyone likes to talk about their feelings or talk about their grief. And other people prefer to do something physical with their grief. So intuitive versus instrumental grievers is a whole spectrum, and not nobody, but most people are somewhere in between. There are people that are on one side or the other of the spectrum, but for instance, intuitive grievers look more like they are the ones generally that want to talk about their feelings. They have strong emotional reactions to the death. They really appreciate mirroring of feelings, and that's why they seek out support from other people, and they like to share about the details of the death and of their loss with other people, and they gain support from that. And the way they adapt in their grief, too, involves expressing and exploring their feelings. Versus instrumental grievers, where their expression is primarily through their thoughts, behavioral, or physical, the way that they adapt to their grief is through thinking and doing things. Like your grievers that will say, well, I'm just going to go to the gym. The gym helps me feel better, doing something physical. Or I am going to spend time gardening in the garden. That really helps me with my feelings. Or I'm going to create something. Or people, for instance, that want to start memorials in memory of their loved one who died. Think of the creators of Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, creating a group that's going to be helpful to other people through their pain. That's an instrumental way of grieving, doing something with your grief. So what are some ways that you can cope? How can you get support? You can get support through many different ways. What matters more is that which ways are you drawn to? Not everything works for everyone. That's why it's good to know what helps you when you're experiencing different difficult feelings. And that answer is not the same for everyone. So, for instance, creative arts expression, some people are really drawn to, again, making something, doing something, expressing themselves through paint or through writing or journaling their feelings. Some people really enjoy collage. So different creative modes of expression to be able to express yourself through this. Other people are more drawn to physical activity or mindfulness exercises. And we actually, I'll mention later, but we do have a group for our instrumental grievers that's called our Mindfulness and Movement Through Grief group. And that group focuses on yoga poses as well as some mindfulness activities like breathing or visualizations. Rituals, people often find a lot of usefulness in ritualizing moments. Like, for instance, on the birthday of your father who died, you might want to some people light a candle. Other people have like a little altar in their home that they like to contribute to on special days. There are still others that, for instance, like to go to the botanical gardens because that's something that I used to do with my father. So I do it every year. I go to the botanical gardens on his birthday as a way to ritualize the day for him. Spirituality, some people really move away from their religion or spirituality for a time after their grief because they can often feel angry at God or question the meaning of their faith. But still others really feel more drawn to their religion and to their spiritual beliefs after a death. So they can lean heavily on that as their way to cope. Individual and group therapy can be very helpful. It's good that if you are considering individual therapy, that you seek out counselors that have a grief and bereavement background to be able to get the best help that you can. Support groups can be very helpful for people because you're around others that are going through something similar and can offer a different, unique perspective than a therapist can. And self-care, this is the time where self-care tends to slip away, but it's always good to remind yourself that when you're in grief, you need to actually double up on your self-care because you're not operating at 100%. And so you need more self-care when you're grieving. And self-care for many people tends to change and look differently when they're in the grief process. So figuring out what self-care means to you in your grief process can also be a journey for you. Maybe you need more sleep during this time or during trigger days or trigger moments because your body is just exhausted. Or maybe it's okay for you to operate at, 70% at work for a little while until you find yourself more adjusted. So it's a very individual process what self-care will mean to you in your grief. So something to keep in mind is that what we're hoping for is you're not trying in your grief process to give up the relationship that you had with the deceased, but to have a way to continue the bond with them in their physical absence. And how do you now incorporate this person in your life in their physical absence? So, like some of our family members talk about hearing the voice of their loved one, knowing what they would say in any particular situation. And so we try to help people cultivate that in their lives. Is how do you continue to take this person with you? What was the impact that this person had in your life on you? And how can you continue that bond now? And what does that look like? So it's not about forgetting the person. You could never forget a significant relationship that you had in your life. It's just about incorporating this loss internally and being able to use it in your life in ways that are effective. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the groups that we offer here at Calvary, and just to say that all of our groups are free and open to the community as well as to our Calvary families. And again, they are free. There is no insurance that someone has to pay for to come into our groups. And our bereavement groups are offered in Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Manhattan. And collectively, we have over 25 groups that we offer. Our groups for the adults are separated generally by relationship, and our children's groups are separated by age. So here are some of the groups that we have. We have groups for the death of a spouse or a partner. We have a death of a child groups, death of a sibling groups, death of a parent groups. Then our kids groups are Precious Moments, which is for 6 to 9-year-olds. We have our tweens groups, which are for 10 to 12-year-olds. And then we have our teens, which are for 13 to about 17 or 18-year-olds. We have a young adult group in our Brooklyn site currently. We have a men's group specifically just for men in our Bronx site. We have a Spanish-speaking group in our Bronx site, and the mindfulness and movement group that I shared about earlier, which is really for our grievers that really don't prefer to talk and share about their feelings in their loss. They prefer to do something physical. So we incorporate visualizations as well as yoga in that particular group. And lastly, we offer Camp Compass. Camp Compass is a 5-day day camp in August that we hold annually for all the children, adolescents that have been a part of our groups throughout the year. And it's a really wonderful week for the kids. Again, this service is also free of charge. Our families don't pay anything to come to camp. And we basically have buses that leave from each location and go to Kingsborough Community College, which is in Brooklyn. We all meet there every morning, and there are a lot of recreation activities that the children have. But also what makes the camp really special is that we offer a lot of bereavement activities during the week as well. It's a great way for the kids to consolidate what they've learned in the group throughout the year, and also to be able to meet one another from the different boroughs and create different memories together. And so all of the groups are weekly that we have, and there is an intake process involved. So when you think about ways to reach out, and ways to get support for yourself, this is one of the ways that you can do it, is to reach out and find a support group in your area that would be helpful for you, and see if that's a good mode for you to go through your grief process. And I wanted to be able to leave some time for questions. So I've come to the end of my slideshow presentation here, and I wanted to hear from you and see if you had any questions for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. That was a really interesting and helpful presentation. Like Maria said, if you have any question, please add it to the Q&A box. Or if you want to say something, I can unmute the person that wants to say something and we can hear the question directly.
Sure. Do I have to do anything here on my end, Shayna?
No, you don't have to do anything. No, you don't have to do anything. We're just gonna wait if they have any question, if they want to go back to any other slide that you they want to see again.
Sure. I'll leave the slides open.
Mm-hmm. One person. Hi, Stacy.
Hi.
Yeah, you said you had a question? Yes, I can hear you.
This is Maria. I thought I heard somebody. Stacy?
Yes, somebody wants to say something. 1 second.
Okay. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so my question was, Maria, you spoke about 2 types of grievers, intuitive and instrumental.
Yes.
Are there any other schools of thought on grievers? I know you said this was by somebody, Ndoka. I think
yes, Martin Ndoka.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts about what? About
the types of grievers?
There are thoughts about how we grieve, but as far as they came up with this spectrum of ways to categorize, along the spectrum of how people grieve, a different style, the instrumental versus intuitive. But there is no other one like that, no.
Okay, thank you.
But again, the important thing to remember, because sometimes when you bring it up in groups, for instance, people think they're one or the other, is that it is a spectrum. So many of us fall somewhere along that continuum, somewhere in the middle, or maybe we lean more towards being instrumental grievers or more towards intuitive. But generally, you're not one or the other. You fall somewhere in that continuum.
Okay. Thank you. And one other question. Is it possible to get this PowerPoint or the information? And if that's possible, can it then be shared with others?
At the end of the presentation, we usually have it posted online. But if you want the physical PowerPoint, so that will be up to Maria if you want to share it. But the presentation, again, will be posted on our website, pssusa.org, so you can find it there.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, great.
And also, if you have any question, I believe, Maria, you can put your information up the screen. If you have additional question, or if you want to know exactly where are the support group and other group throughout the city, I believe is in the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Manhattan. So you can contact her.
Yes, I have. I went back to my first slide here, which has my phone number. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, or if you want to refer anyone. You can use my phone number there as a referral source for yourself. And please feel free to reach out at any time.
All right. Thank you again, Maria. That was a really good information for everyone. Again, if you want to see the presentation again, to hear more information about it, or you missed something, you can go back to our website. The webinar will be online for a couple of days. And also, if you have direct question for Maria, please contact her. The number is on the screen. And if you have any other question about PSS, please contact me. My information is on line, but I can, it's, my number is 917-734-9292. Again, my name is Shayna Jacques. I'm the outreach manager of IPSS. And again, thank you.
Thank you. And Shayna, can I just add, I didn't add my email address on my slides. I would love to do that if you would like to write it down, for those of you that are still there.
Okay.
It's M for Maria, and then my last name, which is on this slide here, Georgopoulos at calvaryhospital.org. So it's CALVARY hospital.org.
All right.
And thank you again.
No problem. Thank you, everyone. And maybe another day we'll have another presentation again about that. That was really good.
Thank you. Take good care.